Hi there, thank you for joining me on this conversation. For those listening to this as a podcast, welcome to our 5th episode of the series. My name is Ruo and I'm a Senior Associate in our Charities and Social Enterprises team. I'm excited to be joined in person today by Dr Janis Wong. Janis is the Technology Policy Advisor at the Law Society. She has a background in data protection, ethics and governance, and she holds an interdisciplinary PhD in computer science, where her thesis was awarded the Stefano Rodota Award last year by the Council Europe Committee of Convention 108 for Best PhD Thesis on Data Protection. Previously, she was a postdoc research associate at the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National Artificial Intelligence and Data Science Institute, and a research fellow at the Open Data Institute. Janis, a very warm welcome to you. First of all, thank you so much for sparing your time and for joining me in person today. I'm really honoured to have you here. Now we met many moons ago when we both studied and worked at the LSE, and you kindly joined me on a panel discussion at the Charity Law Association conference last year on charities and AI. So perhaps if I may start by asking you if you could tell me a bit more about the Law Society and what your role is.
Sure, thanks Ruo for the invitation. It's always lovely to chat and hello to podcast listeners as well. I'm Janis Wong, as mentioned, and I lead on our data policy work at the Law Society of England and Wales, which is the professional organisation for solicitors in the region. We have around 200,000 members within the Law Society, covering all areas of law across public and private sector. And of course, the membership is vast, whether that is from corporate commercial solicitors working in very, very large firms to in-house counsel, as well as, of course, the backbone of the legal sector, the SMEs and the sole practitioners as well. And so in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis is lead on our data and technology law policy work. So I cover AI, of course, but also data protection, digital assets, cybersecurity, as well as our access to justice work around technology.
Wow, quite a broad spectrum of work. So what do you enjoy most about your job? Yes.
So I really like how fast-paced the environment is. Of course, I'm sure many people will know that the technology space is moving very rapidly, and combine that with how quickly the policy landscape is changing, whether that is because there are changes in government, because of the introduction of new bills, new policies, and so that's the bit that I enjoy quite a lot. My day-to-day on that side of things is about responding to consultations, calls for evidence, but a lot of it is also about, especially when it comes to considerations of how technology is changing the legal profession and the way that solicitors and lawyers work, and really getting the opportunity to speak to a lot of members to get a sense of what they consider to be the opportunities and challenges within the landscape, and of course, as a membership organization, where we can do to help. And I think that because we aren't the regulator for the profession, it gives us a better opportunity to, let's say, be more neutral to some extent, but also to really advocate for the needs and wants that the profession might have when it comes to data and tech. So that keeps me busy, but it's a lot of fun.
That sounds really interesting, Janis. And you mentioned that you're involved in consultations and you're, you note on the current developments in AI and tech. So how do you think AI and broadly tech has affected or will affect the charity sector?
It's a big question, and I think that in terms of let's say some of the more general impacts to start with, and then I'll talk a little bit more about charities, is that I think that it does change our expectations when it comes to work, what we're doing on a daily basis, and trying to see if there are any ways that technology can be adopted to improve efficiencies or automate certain things, just to make sure that in the work that we are doing, whether you're in the legal profession or not, or in the charity sector or not, to really maximize the human aspects of the work, including relationship building, potentially recording more podcasts in person, and as well as other ways in which we can interact with people in person. So I think that's one of the really positive things that technology can bring for us. That's not to say, of course, there aren't any challenges when it comes to that. So very aware that digital skills can be really difficult to pick up, whether that is because people aren't used to this pace of change. People are trying to figure out how to integrate the technology within their day-to-day work in a way that is hopefully not as disruptive as possible, but also recognizing that the learning curve can be quite steep when it comes to technology, and so there are some challenges there, and it's very much an ongoing process. I think sometimes when it comes to making sure and trying to utilize technology within a work or professional and organizational context, training can often be seen as a one-off thing that you sort of do, and then you're expected to just be curious or want to learn more and want to adopt technologies. But I think that we know that in practice that's not the case. And so what does training and the future of work and thinking about technology look like? And then thinking more specifically for the charities sector, I think it's quite interesting because one of the really nice things about the sector is that the value proposition is quite clear. Where you are working with people, whether that is clients, whether that is real people on the ground, that really recognize and already understand the value that your organization or your charity might already bring. And so technology can help you reach more people, hopefully, when it comes to the adoption of tech, whether that is AI or otherwise, or thinking about whether or not AI can help you find patterns with existing data that you might have about the people that engage with your organization and charity. And so I think there's a lot of power there. But I think it's really also important to remember that, in the case of charities, it's unlikely, unless you are perhaps a charity focused on technology, that people are coming to you because they're expecting the latest and greatest tech deployment. So it's really just about trying to find the balance between technology adoption, of course, wanting to develop those skills, but hopefully just as a tool, as opposed to necessarily a means to an end.
Sure, that's really fascinating. And as you know from our discussion last year, I'm very interested, especially on the impact that AI specifically has on some of the smaller charities that we have in this country, who perhaps don't have the necessary infrastructure or the staff or the training to be able to know what to do with AI, and having sort of wider discussions with people working at the intersection between AI and charity. What I'm hearing is that AI will be of most benefit for some of the larger charities who have the infrastructure, the programs, the personnel to train and to understand, how best to utilize it. But perhaps for some of the smaller charities or those unregistered charities who don't have staff, don't have the infrastructure, they may be left behind. And increasingly, as we know, we're moving towards a more digital age. I'm seeing this with publications from the Charity Commission, movement to the My Charity Commission account, where things are being done online to help with efficiency. But my worry is, the demographics of those that are trustees who volunteer, they may not have the necessary skills, ability, or the wherewithal to cope and deal with AI. So, I think in part this has to do with what the regulation in this country looks like, and I know that hasn't changed so much since we talked about this last year, because we have this government has a very pro-innovation take on AI, and I don't believe we have any current laws in this country on AI other than the proposed AI bill that was raised. If we compare to our counterparts in Europe, where we have the EU AI Act. So could you talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape and the differences, and what opportunities or issues you see in that regard?
Sure, you're right. I would say that at present, there's no dedicated AI regulation in the UK. And the current government are very much thinking along the same lines as the previous government around, as you mentioned, taking a pro-innovation approach to regulating AI and emerging technologies. That's not to say that whether from previously or in the short term, let's say there aren't regulations as part of the digital and data landscape that don't apply to AI. So for example, we have data protection regulation, which is being updated as we speak in the form of a new data bill. But there are also new bits and pieces coming in, for example, around cyber resilience and cybersecurity, as well as product safety as well. And these are overlapping areas that will also impact the AI and digital technology and emerging technology ecosystem there. My understanding at the moment is that there is a lot of focus on two things really when it comes to the UK. One is talking and thinking about the data infrastructure side of things. So can we, or can the UK as a country, increase its capacity and capability when it comes to building out new data centers and making sure that when it comes to computational power, the UK is developing those skills and those infrastructures and the ability to scale, certainly when it comes to thinking more medium to long term. So that's one aspect of it. But I think the other aspect that hopefully the charity sector, professional services sector, professional businesses can also tap into is the upskilling aspect as well. I think one thing that's being identified by the new government, the current government, is a focus on making sure that people across different sectors are recognized as growth sectors. And I think particularly in conversation around the new industrial strategy, at the moment, there is a really big focus on trying to shine a spotlight on the sectors that are really making a difference to the economy through different lenses. And I think that for the charity sector, that's a really good way of showcasing the work that you do, especially given the many sectors that the charity sector alone intersects with, and of course the legal profession as well as part of that. And so we would be also expecting new funds where hopefully the sector can tap into to upskill when it comes to AI and digital technologies. And so that's where I see a lot of the, I think when it comes to skills, it's both an opportunity and a challenge, and that at least for now, the government does recognize an importance to upskill, and so have also dedicated resource into that. And so I would just urge those who would like to tap into that to make the most of the opportunities that are hopefully to come in the next year or so.
Yeah, sure. And what has the Law Society done to, I guess, make people more aware and more educated, the upskilling aspect that you're saying? Because I believe the Law Society has published some articles on generative AI and correct usage and things like that. So do you want to speak a bit more about the publications of the Law Society?
Sure, I'm never going to say no to a plug of some of our work. So within my role and with the scope of what I do, one of the things that I care quite a lot about is to demystify the landscape and make sure that people have access to the information they need to make hopefully the best decisions for them and for their organization. So as you mentioned, on our website, we have an AI and lawtech hub, which consolidates all of our information, and that includes the Law Society's AI strategy, which I helped lead and develop on, that focuses on the 3 key outcomes we wish to see across innovation, impact, and integrity. So looking at making sure that the legal profession as a whole, more broadly, is able to adopt AI and emerging technologies for the benefit of their clients, as well as their firms and organizations, looking at the regulatory impact aspect of that and shaping the policy landscape when it comes to data and tech. And then also, of course, a crucial part of our work is access to justice, making sure that any AI that is being adopted is done in an ethical and responsible way that respects the rule of law and supports the access to justice. And so one of the other bits of work that we've also published is, as you mentioned, an essentials guide to generative AI that provides a little bit of a background to how we got to where we are at the moment with generative AI. So a little bit about, let's say, traditional AI as well, but importantly, thinking about the risk management aspects when it comes to using and deploying AI as well. We have a specific checklist as part of that piece that's focused on SMEs that will help them hopefully ask the right questions when it comes to thinking about what they might want to procure and use. We also suggest that, for example, and this might be beneficial for certain charities, that are there different charities that can work together within the sector for procurement to make sure that they're getting the best deal and best value out of what they might be using if they're able to collaborate and work together. And then touch on some of the risk elements when it comes to cybersecurity, data protection, thinking about intellectual property, and also crucially, what happens when a tool or a platform that your organization might want to procure is no longer fit for purpose. What are some of the questions that you might want to ask to assess that? And then thinking about sunsets, for example, if you no longer want to be using or paying for that tool. Then what happens? And then we also have other resources as well developed across the Law Society. So we have regular online events that touch on AI and emerging technologies through different lenses and different considerations. And we also have some online courses as well.
That's really insightful. And you already touched on some of the benefits of getting to know more of your guidance and literature, but specifically, I guess, for charities and, as I mentioned earlier, the smaller charities that really don't have a lot of money, they don't have a lot of resources and personnel, where would they start when they look at AI? Because, a lot of us, now AI is embedded in our phones, it's pervasive whether we like it or not. There is a temptation just to, if you have a problem, a charity question, there's a temptation just to go, let me have a look at what the question is on, let me just put it on ChatGPT or Gemini AI, but not having much further thought about, well, how was that output generated? What was the data set that was used to generate the output? Are we, for instance, sharing confidential information about our beneficiaries who are vulnerable? So I guess from that very basic standpoint, what should smaller charities that don't have a lot of infrastructure, what should they be sort of looking out for? What are the risks for them, as well as, I guess, the opportunities?
Yeah, and I don't think these are basic questions at all. I think they're really fundamental to how we should interact with these tools and think about it. But as you say, I think it's a very complicated landscape. The AI ecosystem is very complex, and so it's very difficult to understand what might be going on. I think as a starting point that, always remember not to put any private, confidential information into these tools, because there may be a risk of this information being used to train whichever platform you may be or chosen to use. So that's something to be aware of, and where possible, see if you can document and note down what sort of prompts or inputs when it comes to asking your question to these platforms that you're, just to keep a track record and a log of what you might be asked. So hopefully you also get a better understanding of what comes back to you. There are some of these tools, whether free or paid, that do offer, let's say, very general citations of their sources. So it would be really useful to click through and check to see the validity of that. Is that a website or a source that you would trust or use as part of your research? I would say that when it comes to using these tools, it's a very helpful first pass of what are the sorts of direction of travel that you might look at. But it's important to remember what your obligations may be, whether you're a trustee or whether you're a solicitor or otherwise within whichever profession that you sit in, just to be aware of what obligations you might be, and a good thing to also check what your specific regulator might say about disclosure of the use of AI, whether or not, if you've chosen to use AI for your work, whether you would need to tell and inform the client or the beneficiaries or whoever you might be working with there, even if there isn't any obligation, as we recommend in our Generative AI Essentials Guide. It might be worth mentioning or asking if people are okay with the use of these tools anyways, because I think that transparency is an important principle when it comes to certainly the development and deployment of AI. And so I think it's also a principle that we should take on board as well in the work that we do. But I would say also, just to reiterate, is to have a read through of the checklist that that we have included in the Generative AI Essentials Guide, because hopefully I think that gets you started on some of the questions that you might want to think about. And a lot of the answers might already be within your organization, within the policies you already have around data and technology. So it's not necessarily something new that you have to come up with. It's just, if anything else, a refresher of what is already out there and what are the guardrails you might already have in place for you to be able to use these tools effectively in the work that people are doing.
Sure, those are some very helpful tips. And, as you mentioned, this is a complex area, and I think regulation specifically in the charity sphere is very nascent. Although Paul Latham from the Charity Commission did publish quite a nice sort of introductory guide on charities using AI, so I do recommend listeners to have a look at his article. It's published in April this year. So Janice, at risk of running long, I've got some other types of questions to ask you, because you've come from quite an interesting disciplinary background, first having studied law and then moving into computer science. So what advice would you give to somebody wanting to sort of get onto the path that you're on?
I always really struggle with questions around advice and wanting to open that door, because I'm very cautious that this is very much just my own journey, and I'm not sure that I have any advice in that sense other than to share it. But I'm not going to spend the rest of the podcast doing that. What I will say, though, because I do want to shine a spotlight on the sector, is that, and I don't think you know this, Rue, is that when we were at the LSE, when I was making that transition between law and computer science, it was actually a lot of work from charities and third sector organizations that really kickstarted that process off for me. So, for example, Code First Girls, which is an organization that aims to increase the number of girls and women to learn how to code and sort of get their foot in the door, let's say. So those were courses that were offered for free at the time, and so these are courses that I took to see and get a flavor and sense of some of the work that I do, and also in bridging that gap as well further on, and I still do quite a lot of volunteering work when it comes to going to schools and talking about engagement within STEM, within coding, was also some of my work that I did with RoboGals, which is an organization, a nonprofit organization based out of Australia, but with chapters around the world, where I was a partnerships director for a period of time across EMEA, and really leading on trying to educate as many girls and young women within STEM as possible. So the charity sector has played a huge role in making it possible for me to transition. And I think that now, just to go back to the point about advice as quickly as I can, is just to see what opportunities are out there, and seeing if that's something you want to do. One of the things I do always say is that you don't have to be a plumber to use the toilet. And what I mean by that is that, to get involved within technology or within policy, you don't necessarily have to know how to code or know how to program. You just need an understanding and an interest, of course, in that landscape, and also specific to the other area of potential overlapping interest that you have. And if there's only one piece of advice, it's just to really be curious about it. Ask a lot of questions, and try to explore as much as you can. And I think within technology, within policy, there are a lot of intersections there. So it's just figuring out what keeps you going.
Thank you, Janice, for sharing. You're reticent about saying advice, but it's very interesting to see how you've sort of come to where you are now, having followed sort of your own interests, and taking advantage of different opportunities that were offered to you at the time. I guess linked to my last question, what advice would you give to your younger self?
My younger self. No, I think I'm not really a person to have regrets in life, mainly because I think that when you are faced with a decision that you have to make, I think the only advice I would give around that is to remember that, try to make the best decision that you have in the moment that you are making it, and don't worry too much about the future. Let's say, I think sometimes, especially when people are perhaps a bit younger, you get into some sort of paralysis around whether a decision you're making is right, how it'll impact your future, etc., etc. And I'm not saying that it's not important to think about the future, but there's so many things that happen in your personal life, in the world around you, that is completely unpredictable. And so just to not stress out too much about making decisions, or at least I wish I didn't. Perhaps when I was younger, make them with the best knowledge that you have of your present self, and then I think regardless, your future self probably will thank you for it in the future, or that if you're looking back in a couple of years' time, you might realize that actually that decision didn't have such a big impact on yourself now. So I think just do the best that you can in the moment, and enjoy it along the way as well.
Wow, that's such wise advice. Thank you, Janice. Well, in applying advice, looking at the present, at the time of this recording, it's Trustee Week. So happy Trustees Week. And David Holsworth, the relatively new CEO of the Charity Commission, wrote a thank you note to all the trustees on the 4th of November. And in this thank you note, I thought it was quite helpful that he showcased some events to help support aspiring and inspiring trustees. And he also mentioned the new charities quiz, which I really do recommend to sort of test your legal knowledge, and also to help with perhaps some governance questions you may have. And then just a couple of other shout outs. So the Charity Commission also have now released the date of the AGM a bit later than last year. It's going to be held on the 26th of November in London. So I highly recommend those that are free to go to this event, because not only do you get a chance to ask Charity Commission questions at the AGM itself, but they also have plenty of different stalls representing all the different departments. So it's a really good opportunity to learn about the very multifaceted work of the Charity Commission, and to get to meet some of the heads of the departments. So I do recommend going to that if you are free that day. And lastly, I did an event with the former Chief Executive of the Charity Commission, Dame Helen Stevenson, at the Gradle Institute, and she shared some of her reflections at the helm of the Charity Commission. So that recording is available on Oxfordshire Community Foundation's website. So if you're inclined to have a listen to the previous Chief Executive's reflections, then please do check that out on the website. On that note, thank you, Janice, for your time and coming to office today. And thank you for those watching and those listening to this as a podcast. I hope you found our conversation informative and inspiring. And I hope to catch you in our next episode.